Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you have not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located on the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, please also fill out a yellow comment card. We will follow the basic format listed on the back of the agenda. Includes all the hearing procedure steps. We may vary from the process based on the specific circumstances of each hearing. Next on the agenda is approval of the minutes from a series of meetings, March 26, 2019, July 23rd, 2019, September 10th, and September 24th of 2019. Does anybody have any corrections to make to either of the series of minutes?
No.
No.
Nope. I will entertain a motion to approve the notes as presented.
I'd like to make a motion to approve minutes from March 26, 2019, July 23, 2019, September 10, 2019, and September 24, 2019.
I'll second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The notes are approved. Are there any informational items from staff today?
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. I just wanted to point out a couple of events that are coming up in December because we are not scheduled to have a meeting before then. Actually, two events on December 4th. The Clackamas County Housing Authority is hosting an open house to unveil the, basically the proposed hillside master plan. After going through a public process and developing that master plan over the course of the past year, on Wednesday the 4th at 5:30 p.m. at Providence Hospital in the Mother Gamelin room. They're going to be unveiling that. And then at 6:30 p.m. we're actually hosting a Planning 101 here in Council Chambers, kind of geared toward people in Milwaukee that just have a general interest as far as how land use planning works, everything from the comprehensive plan to development code regulations, kind of how things are related, how they can get involved, provide public comments. So we've sent that out to our email list and gotten, it'll be in the pilot as well. I believe it might have been in the pilot for this month, but we would invite people to come out to both of those events.
For the Planning 101, I'm curious, is an RSVP asked for that?
We requested one. They're not required, just so we can kind of gauge interest. But we'll probably send a reminder as we get a little bit closer to the date and ask for RSVPs.
And Mr. Leviton, I hope that got sent to the land use chairs in each NDA as well.
It did, yes, and so that's included on, they're all included. We send it out to our comp plan email list and then to the NDA list, the land use chairs, all of the NDA board members. So everyone on the commission should have received it. And so, yeah, we're hoping to actually, speaking of the land use chairs, we're going to be reaching out to them to invite them to your December 10th meeting. To kind of discuss some items with them moving forward with our work plan and kind of get their thoughts on it. So they'll be invited to your December 10th regular meeting. And then I also just wanted to point out, just on the forecast for future meetings, there's an item that's not on there. That's the joint session with the City Council on December 17th. That's during the council's regular meeting. It's currently scheduled, I think, for 7:55 p.m. There are a couple tentative items before it, so it could get bumped up a little bit. But, you know, we would encourage commissioners to come and discuss the upcoming work plan for the next couple of years with the council. So that's December 17th, currently scheduled for 7:55 p.m.
Thank you. Question, Lauren?
Did you say 7:55?
7:55 is where it's on the agenda right now.
Okay.
Very specific. So.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
Okay. So next on the agenda is audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on items that are not part of tonight's agenda. If anyone here wishes to comment on an item that is on the agenda, there will be time for comments after the staff presentation. Is there anybody here tonight to comment on an item that is not on the agenda? So next we'll move on to the public hearings. public hearing on CU-2019-002 is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application number CU-2019-002. The purpose of the application is to request a conditional use on the property located at 3701 Southeast International Way. The application has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee zoning subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provision. The applicant has the burden of proving that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found.
Section 19.307, General Commercial Zone, Section 19.905, Conditional Uses, and Section 19.1006, Type 3 Review.
Thank you. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit written comments or testify in person or sign the Planning Commission attendance sign-up sheet in the hallway. I will recognize those persons who have completed the testimony cards and given them to me. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the record so they may be entered into the minutes. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extensions shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. So we've got a couple of folks here in the audience, but I haven't yet received any yellow comment cards, so I'll assume everybody's here is either for the next hearing, if you'd like to comment, just give it an opportunity for anyone who needed to fill out a card for this one. Nope, no takers. Next, conflicts of interest or site visits. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing?
No.
No. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts?
No.
And will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to the hearing please raise their hand?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application?
No.
And does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Let's proceed to the staff report.
Good evening. Vera Coleus, Associate Planner, here to present the staff report for this project. So the project area is located at the corner of 37th Avenue and Southeast International Way. The site's developed with approximately 598 self-storage units and employee office space and approximately 4,800 square feet of tenant office space facing 37th Avenue. The immediately surrounding areas comprise primarily of developments with multiple office-type buildings, large parcels with shared off-street parking. The zoning on this property is part of the reason why we're here this evening. The site is zoned general commercial as it fronts 37th and business industrial on the remainder of the property. The Planning Commission approved a conditional use for self-storage facilities on the site back in 1989. The majority of the site's about 145,000 square feet is zoned BI, or business industrial. Approximately 25% of the site is zoned CG, the general commercial zone, and again, that's the area fronting 37th Avenue. At the time of the conditional approval for the site, self-storage was determined to be a similar use to the list of conditional uses in the CG zone. One of the original conditions of approval required that about 6,000 square feet of the structure facing 37th Avenue was to be used for uses that are permitted outright in the CG zone, and that's the rub here. So the proposal is to convert the area that you see outlined in red and hatched, is to convert approximately 4,800 square feet, essentially the tenant office space in the building, to approximately 98 self-storage units. So they want to convert that office space into additional self-storage unit. When asked, the applicant states that over the last 8 years or so, the occupancy of that tenant office space has been below 50%. And there's been one long-term tenant, but the other units have had constant turnover and issues. So the existing office space utilized for self-storage operations would remain, but the highest and best use is self-storage at that location, and that's why the applicant is asking to convert it. They're not really in the landlord tenant, for office space kind of business. They'd rather convert it to what is their business. No exterior modifications are proposed for the building. All of the work would be done on the inside of the building as you see it. All the new self-storage units would be enclosed within the existing building and accessed inside, so there wouldn't be any exterior modifications. So from the street, it would generally resemble kind of that storefront office space that you see now. But because the project would affect a condition of approval from that original 1989 approval, the proposal requires approval of a major modification to a conditional use, because that's how it was approved in the first place. The approval criteria for a major modification to a conditional use are the same as instituting a new conditional use. So we look at the characteristics of the lot, operating and physical characteristics of the site. We're looking at reasonable compatibility, impacts to surrounding properties, and would they be mitigated, and making sure that it's consistent with our applicable policies. There are no approval criteria for a conditional use within the CG zone, so we're relying only on the conditional use approval criteria. The key issue that we identified would be, would the proposed additional self-storage units result in any impacts that would require mitigation? We have not identified any negative impacts from the proposal. Adding the 98 storage units to the existing almost 600 storage units is about a 16% increase in the number of storage units. Access to the site is between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. All day, but that can vary throughout the day, of course, whenever folks are looking to access the property. Vehicular and pedestrian access, parking configuration, site circulation remains exactly the same as it is today, so there are no changes to how that would work. In general, the self-storage use actually would decrease the intensity of the use at that location if you look at how trip generation would work, because folks can access the site throughout the day whenever, not just during, set business hours. Fewer vehicular trips would be generated, and that would decrease the impact on public infrastructure or traffic within the area. And certainly when compared to uses that are permitted outright in the CG zone, like retail or office uses. No special impacts are anticipated, so we have not recommended any specific mitigation or conditions of approval required for the application. Staff recommends approval of the modification to the conditional use to allow the conversion of to the additional units, and we would recommend adoption of the recommended findings in support of approval. As always, you have some options for making your decision tonight. You could approve the application as proposed and as presented with the findings that we've submitted to you. You could approve the application by modifying those findings or including some conditions of approval. We'll need to put those together tonight on the record. You could continue the hearing, or certainly you could deny the application. We would need findings for denial of that. The 120-day clock for this application is February 1st, so whatever decision is made, including any appeals to City Council, would have to be completed by that date. That concludes the presentation. Maybe I'll put up the proposal in case you have any questions, but I'm happy to answer them. The applicant is here as well to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions for staff?
None.
I just want to ask one, and maybe you can, is the access to the storage unit from inside the quadrant, or is it from outside?
From the inside, from the interior of the building.
Okay.
There are doors to kind of get in, and then for the proposed area, then the units would be accessed from the inside of the building. They wouldn't have doors kind of facing out to the parking area, no. If that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess if I wanted to get into my storage unit, I have to drive inside the complex to gain the access. Or is the access from the
I
outside?
believe these units are accessed both from the front and from the back. It would depend on how those units are configured inside, but maybe I'll let the applicant answer
Okay.
that question specifically. But I thought that they were sort of laid out back to backs or front to front so that you could access some from the front and some from the inside as well. But I'll let them speak to the
Okay, thank
details of
you.
that.
Is any other questions?
No.
I did have one. Is
Yeah.
the existing office space for the storage unit, is that in the red, the required office space, or is that in addition to?
It's actually in the corner, so it's where the red sort of meets the green, but it's in that area, sort of in the lower left
In the
portion
green?
of the building. I think that's, part of it's in the green and part of it's in the red, I believe, because it's about 4,800 square feet to be converted, so that would leave about the 1,200 square feet for the employee office, the office space there. But again, I could have the applicant can answer you more specifically. We didn't get a floor plan.
There is a floor plan in
Oh,
the
is there?
packet.
Oh, wait, there is.
Yep.
That's right. Sorry. They did include that. Trying to remember. That includes oh, right, so it's the existing office space. Sorry, that's right. So the existing office space is what would remain of the office space. So that's in fact actually in the green area. It's not being proposed to be converted.
Okay.
So all the conversion is happening is in that
Gotcha.
red area. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that would probably answer the first question as well about how do you access them? It's off of the
The front.
west side of the
Yep.
building.
So it'd be utilizing the existing doors to go through, and then they're in the corridors, running east-west.
And have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the meeting?
We have not, no.
Right, well, with that, we can move on to applicant testimony. Does the applicant like to come up and give some facts? Please state your name and address for the record.
Name is Mike Serbo. I'm with Galloway and Company. We're at 6162 South Willow Drive, Suite 320 in Greenwood Village, Colorado, 80111. We're a civil architecture firm hired by Public Storage here on their behalf tonight. Don't have a lot to add. I think staff did a great job with the report, summarizing the findings. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard here tonight. Staff was great to work with throughout the entire process. It is a little of a wrinkle when you have a split zone on a consistent lot. I know this is a unique scenario, but just wanted to make sure that we were here to answer any questions you may have. Vera touched on it, from a business argument standpoint, the model of the shared use in office, kind of conceived in late 80s, early 90s, really just isn't functioning well in the market today, and that's the reason why Public Storage wishes to convert it over. We think we comply with the criteria shown, but I am here to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for the applicant?
None.
Not for me.
I have one. So I guess my question is and I probably know the answer, but why are you accessing it from the what it would be the current storefront side instead of inside the complex?
Well, it's because the doors exist there today. I believe there's 6 doors on that west side, 3 of which would be closed and locked. Other 3 would remain as access to the units themselves. It's because the infrastructure's there as it is today, and the parking on that side lends itself for easy in and out access.
And does Public Storage have an issue? I mean, generally, these things are put inside so that you can put that gate up and protect it and so on and so forth. So is there concern about theft or other access, or is this to allow easier access for people?
They
or?
would be taking steps to mitigate that security concern. It would be accessed by electronic key card to only customers that have paid their fees to use that space. There is one modification to that exterior that was not mentioned. Any unit that fronts a window that's transparent today would become opaque for security concerns, so that wasn't visible to the outside.
Any other questions? I did have one. How many people are employed at the site as an employee of this storage unit?
You know, to be totally honest, I'd have to get back to you with a firm answer. I understand that there are 3 to 4 employees throughout the, work week.
Throughout the work week. And
Not at one given time, but
would there be a need for any additional employees as the number of storage units is expanded?
there would not.
And the occupancy of the offices was reported as one long-term lease, but less than 50%. How many discrete units are available for rent as exists today?
I believe there are 6 to align with each door. But I cannot say that with 100%
So
certainty.
there's 6 doors into the office space, so there could be up to 6 or maybe some number less than that if the doors are shared discrete office spaces.
Correct. They could be divided differently based on the tenant's need. but
Okay.
Correct.
Great. Thank you. Well, I think we've got what we needed in terms of the staff presentation, and thank you for coming up and providing that additional context.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I don't have any yellow comment cards, so I'll assume there's nobody here to speak in favor or neutral or opposed to the application. So with that, any final opportunity for commissioners to ask questions? Then I will close the public testimony portion of this hearing on CU-2019-002. Is the commission ready for discussion?
Yes.
Let's discuss. Who wants to go first? Commissioner Massey?
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward, I think. I can support this proposal and move forward.
Makes total sense to me.
I'm with them. I think this is straightforward, and I'm inclined to approve.
Agreed.
I hate to be the voice of a naysayer, but I am getting hung up on the approval criteria around consistency with the comprehensive plan policies, which states that encouraging the retention of existing businesses and recruitment of new businesses that provide long-term employment opportunities. 37th Avenue, it is a commercial zone, and there are businesses that employ more people per square foot, and this would be a net decrease in employment in a commercial district. And so I don't think I can find that losing the commercial space, even though I see there's a lot of logical sense in terms of making the storage unit space consistent, but losing the office space on a commercial street surrounded by other commercial space, in my mind, is not consistent with the comprehensive plan policies around long-term employment opportunities. So I'm going to be inclined to vote no on this, just because I can't find it consistent with that approval criteria.
I'd like to make a motion to approve land use application master file CU 2019-002 and adopt the recommended findings and conditions of approval found in attachments 1 and 2.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. So the motion passes 4-1. If anyone wishes to appeal this decision to City Council, you must make application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of the mailing of the notice of decision. Please see planning staff for details. Thank you, everybody. Okay. And that was my first taking a stand.
Right?
In the face of.
Feels good sometimes, doesn't it?
I feel good about
Issues.
that, yeah.
Good deliberation.
It was very logical on your end as well.
Very much.
Joseph would be so
Didn't even
proud.
want to debate it with me. Just steamrolled me, Greg.
Yeah, you know.
It's the shoes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Where are we next? Okay. Next, we have a public hearing on file ZA-2019-002. It's called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider legislative amendments to recommend to City Council approval of the application and adoption of the changes to the current zoning code for accessory dwelling units in residential districts, the interim accessory dwelling unit code amendments consistent with the requirements outlined in House Bill 2001. I will recognize those persons who have completed the testimony cards and given them to me. We're starting to get some yellow cards coming in here. Thank you, everybody. When you come to the hearing, when you come to the podium, you'll be asked to state your name and address for the record so they may be entered into the minutes. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. So we've got 3 comment cards filled out for testimony today. So I think with that relatively small number, we don't need to resort to the timer, but we will ask folks to stick to the 3-minute time limit when you have your opportunity to testify. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No.
And does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain?
No.
No.
Let's proceed to the staff report presentation.
Good evening, Vera Colias, Planning Department. We're here to talk about a couple of interim code amendments, and we call them interim because it's in advance of sort of the larger package of code amendments that will be coming subsequent to the comprehensive plan process. Currently, city code permits accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, in residential districts subject to some specific regulations. Specifically, the city zoning code requires owner occupancy of either the main dwelling unit or the ADU on a property. And we also the code requires an additional off-street parking space for the ADU. The proposed amendments that are before you relate to the state requirement that's outlined in House Bill 2001. That section, there's a section of the bill prohibits certain requirements for ADUs, and it amends a section of the Oregon Statutes 197.312, and this particular section is subject to an effective date of January 1st, 2020. So the city is moving forward with making sure that we get those code amendments completed in time to be in compliance with House Bill 2001. The proposed revisions are intended to meet the amendments related to, quote, reasonable local regulations related to siting and design for ADUs. The legislation allows communities to have reasonable regulations, but the House bill specifically notes that local regulations cannot require owner occupancy on a property with an ADU for either the primary structure or the ADU, and the code cannot require ADUs to provide an additional off-street parking space. Both things our code currently does. The exception is for ADUs that would be used as a vacation rental. So the code amendments before you are intended to meet the letter of that House Bill 2001 for those particular requirements. So the limited amendments that you have before you remove the owner occupancy requirement for the primary structure or for the ADU, and the code amendments remove the requirement for the additional off-street parking space for an ADU, except unless the ADU is permitted to be used as a vacation rental. And again, vacation rentals are subject to a conditional use approval process that the Planning Commission would be reviewing. So that is a type 3 review. So that's the limitation of those code amendments, is intended to meet the specific requirements of the House bill by the effective date of January 1st, 2020. So these amendments would be effective January 1st. Should the Planning Commission make recommendations this evening, we'll be before the City Council on December 17th to adopt the code amendments at that time, again with the effective date of January 1st. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any clarifying questions for staff?
What is the penalty if we do not adopt these rules?
That's a great question. David, are you familiar with our city attorney?
Or does it happen automatically anyways? I guess.
Well, I haven't analyzed that issue. My thought is because it's a statutory requirement at the state level, that if our local code's not in compliance with it, and we tried to apply that criteria to somebody, that would be subject to challenge as contrary to state statute.
So it goes through LUFA or something like that, or LUBA?
LUBA. It depends what the forum is that we are trying to apply the criteria, but that's one possible pathway.
And so if I'm just trying to write like state law supersedes federal law in some cases and not in other cases. So I'm just trying to, does local law supersede state law in any way? Or does a challenge then maybe bring this up to the Oregon State Supreme Court and they make a ruling on whether or not it's constitutional or not or something like that?
It would depend on the type of challenge brought. Usually challenges of that sort are brought on the facial constitutionality of the statute. So somebody would have likely challenged it or is preparing to challenge it at the state level. If it's constitutional on its face. The other possible challenge is whether it's constitutionally applied to somebody. So, I mean, I don't see an issue like this going up that chain, though.
Okay.
And it definitely trumps local regulation.
Okay, all right. And then my other question is can we describe what off-street, I know what off-street is, but I guess what I'm getting is, does any residence, is it required to have one off-street parking currently by code?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that could mean an 8-foot, 20-foot driveway, right? Because you can't get two cars into a 8-foot wide, 20-foot driveway, right?
The way our code is written, an off-street parking space has to meet a couple of things. One is the minimum measurement is 9 by 18, so 9 feet wide, 18 feet long, and the required off-street parking space cannot be within the front yard setback of your home. So what effectively that does is if you have a house with a garage, your garage is your required off-street parking space, and so you're good. Generally, if we imagine a property that has a garage, then their driveway would be parking space number 2, effectively. But that's how our code is written. It used to be written that you had to provide a garage or covered parking. It does not require that anymore, but we do require that the off-street parking space be outside the front yard setback. You might recall the variance that we had at our last hearing for the house with the ADU and on 32nd Avenue. That parking space to the side was in order to provide that off-street parking space, because that was before this code amendment. But the whole purpose of that side parking space was to satisfy our current code that requires that off-street parking space for an ADU. It's effectively, of course, it's 2 dwelling units on a property. You have to provide two parking spaces. But the code, as amended, would not require that second parking space.
So technically, your off-street parking is inside the front of your 20 feet, right? Or
It has to be behind that.
behind the 20 feet?
We're going to, to meet that requirement, it has to be outside that first 20 feet, if that's your front yard setback.
And with our ADUs, does that same rule apply, or does that ADU apply, or does the off-street parking apply to the frontage of the primary house?
So the way our code is written right now, the ADU would have to provide that required off-street parking space, and it would have to be outside of that front yard setback as well.
Of the ADU or the primary
Both.
structure?
Both. Yeah, I mean, so it would have to be outside the front yard setback, so outside of that first 20 feet.
So if I wanted to convert my, I guess I couldn't. Well, let's say if I converted my garage into an ADU, but I had a parking spot off to the side, right?
Yep.
But then I couldn't actually do the ADU unless if I completed another parking spot
Right.
farther back, or
Right.
be able to get two
That's right.
vehicles in.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
all
under
right.
the code amendment, you'd be fine, because your parking space is
Right.
to the side of
It
your-
would be off-street. Okay, all right.
Good question.
Any other questions for staff?
If I could just add a little bit of legislative context, if you don't mind. So back in 2017, Senate Bill 1051 was passed by the legislature, which basically required cities to allow ADUs anywhere in any residential zoning district because a lot of cities didn't used to allow them. So that was passed 2 years ago. At that point, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, DLCD, made some recommendations, including that you should get rid of your owner occupancy and your parking requirement. They didn't mandate that. So they basically, during the 2019 legislative session, as part of House Bill 2001, added the additional regulations kind of in that interim period between 2017 and 2019 when we were starting to think about ADUs. We had discussed for ADUs potentially getting rid of the requirement that it be outside of the front yard setback. So you would need to provide one off-street parking space outside of that front yard setback for the primary unit, but then you could essentially use your driveway for the ADU. So we don't see this as a major change from that because most houses still do have an ADU, and our recommendation would have been, yeah, you need a second spot, but it can basically just be in the driveway. So it effectively doesn't really change anything.
Any other questions for staff?
Thank you.
Thank you, Vera.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm supposed to ask you, Vera, if we've received any other correspondences on this matter other than those included in the meeting packet.
Yes, you have. You had a packet of some items at your seats when you got here this evening. You have before you a set of revised findings recommending approval. Those findings, the revision is in the highlighted yellow, and those reflect the comments that we received today from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. Those revised findings specifically relate to Goal 10 and the consistency of the code amendments with Goal 10, which is the statewide housing goal. You also had in that packet some supplemental written testimony from Elvis Clark that was received today as well. So those two items were the new comments that were not in the packet.
Thank you. Okay, next we'll move on to public testimony. I've received 3 yellow comment cards here, so if anyone else wishes to testify and you haven't filled out a card yet, you still have an opportunity. I have 2 neutral testimonies and 1 in opposition. The order that we take public testimony is support, opposed, and neutral. So we'll start by calling Elvis Clark, who's in opposition. Please state your name and address for the record, and please limit your testimony to 3 minutes.
Elvis Clark. Hello, planning commissioners and planning staff. I live in the Ardenwell neighborhood, and so, yeah. Well, the testimony submitted today, or had it submitted today, dealt with the 2 conditions of the House Bill 2001. One was to deal with owner occupancy, and the other, the off-street parking. And so what I learned is a little bit more information here on that. It would be a different, I was concerned with the owner occupancy on a vacation rental because it's good to have a owner nearby when you have a ADU rental. But anyways, here I find out that it's going to be a different process than what you're doing here for off-street parking. And I'm not sure why that is, why you would go to, if I understand it correctly, you go to each ADU that comes through and you determine then if it needs to be owner occupied or not. I'm not sure why you don't treat that write the same verbiage as you've done for off-street parking as you do for owner, and do it for owner occupancy too, for the requirement that you have an owner occupied nearby for the ADU rental. So that's my objection here. I also submitted other testimony, but that was more to do with more general keeping to off-street parking when you got new construction. I'm not totally sure how that works because I've seen some cases where there is no off-street parking with the new construction, but in some other cases there is a sidewalk. So I'm hoping that with new ADU construction, we'd keep the sidewalk requirement and other types, cottage clusters, because the streets might get filled up with on-street parking. A lot of our neighborhood streets aren't going to be getting sidewalks for a very long time, probably. And so if you put ADUs and other things in there and it goes on street parking, then you got some competition for the road space there between walkers, bikers, and the car driver. So anyways, that's my testimony. Thank you for any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Clark. Any questions?
No.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next we'll move on to the neutral testimony. I'll call Ronell Coburn, and please state your name and address. Uh-oh.
Hang on. Hi, my name's Ronell Coburn. I live on Southeast 29th and Ardenwald. And I'm actually all for ADUs for various reasons. I have friends who are single moms who built ADUs so they can afford to have a house and rent them as vacation rentals, because you make a whole lot more money with it being a vacation rental. These friends that I have are in Portland, and in Portland, they require owner occupancy in one of the units if either one of them is a vacation rental. And I think that does a couple of good things. One is it keeps investors from coming in, buying houses, building an ADU, renting them both out as short-term rentals, and taking housing off of our market when everything's here aimed at increasing long-term rentals. So I'm concerned particularly about that. Also, a lot of people with ADUs can be concerned that if they're short-term rentals and no owner on site, that there could be wild parties and noise and smoking and problems. And my experience, I'm an Airbnb user around the world in many countries, that has been true in the places I've been. When there's no owner occupancy, there tend to be problems. And when there is owner occupancy, there are no problems with short-term renters. So those are my concerns about vacation rentals specifically. I'll leave all the parking stuff to other people. That I think that really having owner occupancy, if there's a vacation rental, would be very important on both those fronts, both from displacing long-term rental housing and to keep any problems down within the neighborhoods with people coming in to rent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coburn. Any questions?
Yeah.
No.
Thanks so much.
Okay. It gets so complicated, as you all know too well.
Okay. And then last, I have a neutral testimony from Jamie Mathis, and please state your name and address for the record. We'd ask that you keep your testimony to 3 minutes, please.
I'll try,
Thank
although
you.
I'm a trained public speaker, so I can't promise anything. I'm Jamie Mathis, and I live on Evergreen Avenue and Briggs in Milwaukee Heights. I'm curious about this zoning change for a couple of reasons. I have lived in this area my entire life, although brief stints living abroad, and I know that when it comes to vacation rentals, without having an owner occupancy clause or requirement, it can really change the character of neighborhoods. So that's something that I think with the expanded populations that are coming into this area, which is the reason for this House bill in the first place, it would be nice to hear a little bit about the thought around maintaining the quality and the character of the neighborhoods by having owner occupancy required in one of the units or the others. And then the other question that I have is really about traffic flow infrastructure. I know Milwaukee has put itself out there on the map as wanting to be a delightfully livable place and equitable for all, and very concerned with sustainability initiatives and upgrades. And bringing a whole host of potentially new people and new revenue into the community. People are going to be coming in driving cars. They're not going to be coming in riding bicycles. They're not going to be coming in riding scooters. They're going to bring their vehicles. And so how is the city planning on accommodating that so that our neighborhoods don't become overrun by the very thing that we say we're trying to mitigate in the mission and the goals of the city. So those are two main questions that I have, and they are concerns. I know that in Europe, just as a final point, Airbnb has now a competing institution called Fairbnb, because in particular cities like Amsterdam in the Netherlands, they discovered this community displacement was a real issue and was really causing problems. And so they started offering options where there was a more long-term community in place with some of these expanded allowances for traveling tourists to come into the neighborhood. So those are my thoughts and comments. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I think I'm done.
Questions for Ms. Mathis?
No.
No, thank you.
Thank
All
you so
right.
much.
Thank you.
Okay. Final opportunity for any questions from the commission for staff. So next, the city, as the applicant, has an opportunity to provide a rebuttal or additional comments in response to the testimony we've heard. Would you like to take that
I would.
opportunity?
Thank you. Appreciate the comments that folks were asking. I just wanted to clarify, because it appears that folks are using vacation rental and short-term rental interchangeably, and they're very different as regulated by our code. Vacation rental is permitted as a conditional use, so that's a very separate type of review process. And a vacation rental is the type of unit that does not have someone living there at least 270 days a year. So it's, I own a house and I just want it to be a vacation rental. I don't live there, as an example. That has to go through a conditional use process before the commission for approval. A short-term rental is like an Airbnb type situation, but that unit has to have an occupant at minimum of 270 days a year. So I think, I just wanted to clarify that for folks, that folks don't think that, that I own a rental house, I can build a rental Airbnb, and everything is vacation rentaled, just like that. That would require conditional use approval. If it were used as an Airbnb, one of the units has to be occupied 270 days a year. So I appreciate the questions. I hope that clarifies the situation of how we're looking to regulate the ADUs as it relates to the House bill itself.
Thank you, Vera. The clarification is very helpful for the commission as well. So with that, the public testimony portion.
Can I ask a question of staff real quick after that? So I just want to make sure that by definition, right, an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, either added on or a secondary unit to a primary structure or a single separate building on the same tax lot as a primary structure.
Correct.
All right. So does the code define a living ADU, as in somebody that's living there on a year lease, versus a short-term or a vacation rental?
A short-term rental is defined as someone living there for less than 30 days.
But these two standards would apply to all ADUs regardless of vacation or short-term.
An ADU under our current code can be used as a short-term rental. It already allows that right now. An ADU could only be used as a vacation rental if it received conditional use approval from the Planning Commission. So this code amendment does not change that either. The code amendment would require an off-street parking space for an ADU that was going to be used as a vacation rental. And again, that has to go through a whole nother review process, a type 3 review process with the Planning Commission.
But maybe I'm just getting hung up. So a short-term rental is anything under 30 days, right?
A short-term rental, the difference between a short-term rental and a long-term rental is the 30-day. So if you rent an apartment and you live there, that's a long-term rental. Short-term rental is an Airbnb type situation where you're renting something to someone for a weekend or a week or what have you. The difference is with a short-term rental, the occupant of that property, the owner or so on, has to occupy that property a minimum of 270 days a year.
Okay, so all short-term and vacation rentals in an ADU are treated the same?
Except that a vacation rental ADU requires a conditional use approval from this commission.
Thank you. Okay, all right.
But just to clarify, those are one-off decisions. Those are by property, and we've addressed those before.
Correct. You've
Yeah,
had a couple
yeah,
of those before you,
Yeah.
yes. Yep.
Pause a little bit, just make sure we're all good here. The public portion of this hearing on file ZA-2019-002 is now closed. Is the commission ready for discussion?
Sure.
Yes.
Yes. Start on this side this time.
Oh. I appreciate the questions that were asked because I think have given me pause. I'm concerned with the ability of the commission or the council to actually enforce if we were to deny the changes being made here because of a potential appeal. If that were not a concern, I would be inclined to deny both of these. I wouldn't be in favor of either. I'm sympathetic to the concerns about an owner being on the property. I'm also sympathetic to what a condition that I see happening a lot in our residential neighborhoods with this parking, street parking. Also concerned about the amount of kind of tax money that would be coming back to the city in order to pay for improvements and things like that. So I would be inclined to not vote in favor.
Commissioner Argo?
In this case, it's kind of hard because it's arguing a counterfactual. We aren't within a purview to be able to vote against resolutions where we're trying to comply with state regulation, even though it's well within our purview to state our concerns and issues. But in this case, I'm linking it more to the fact that we're going to try to accommodate the rulemaking and basically have faith in our process of conditional use permitting for what's going to constitute a vacation rental. So I don't really have much else to say. I think this is simply an ability or a means of amending our code so that we comply with state rules and regs.
Commissioner Massey?
Yeah, I don't see us having many options here. I think we have to comply with state law and that kind of thing. I think that, there are some mitigating factors that that have been highlighted in the recent discussion here about, the short-term rentals and the vacation rentals and that kind of thing, which I hope would mitigate some of the concerns. But, we do have a lot of congestion in many neighborhoods, and it has nothing to do with ADUs or people coming on vacations or short-term rentals. As people have a lot of vehicles and they park them on the street. So that's not going to change. Although I don't like it. I don't think anyone likes it, but it's just a fact of life. So I don't see us having a lot of options here other than to, basically comply with state law.
Commissioner Humer?
Yeah, I'm stuck. I mean, it doesn't matter how we vote because state law supersedes this anyways. And so, eventually the hammer's going to get dropped and you're going to have to change it irregardless. It's just kind of the way that it is. I have concerns about the off-street parking as well. I wouldn't have concerns that if our streets really showed true right-of-ways. And so anybody that has a mailbox outside of downtown knows that the mailman drives his vehicle through the mud every single day and drags it up and down the street. People have to put planters out in front of their houses to make sure that they're not, driving on the grass that, that they maintain because the ruts are all where everybody parks. And it's a huge issue. It's one of my things that just drives me nuts, and I think that it's unfair because, you try to have, if you want to try to have a nice lawn, you have people driving through it, and you don't really have a designated spot where it is or it isn't. And so then what happens is that since people don't want to park on the grass, they kind of park out in the middle of the street, and if you get two cars parked each way, you don't really have room to get a vehicle through. And so it's this huge catch-22. And you're right? Or adding all these ADUs is going to give us enough of a tax base to fix all of these roads, and the issue probably is, no. And so, but unfortunately, we have to do what, has been regulated by the state, and since state law supersedes local law, we should adopt these findings.
We should end, though, on a little bit of lemonade out of the lemons, because the gentleman who first testified,
Mr. Clark?
Mr. Elvis Clark.
you put forth one of the maxims in my field. I'm a transportation planning professional. The 21st century transportation issue of our time is competition for space within limit that has many users who have many needs. If we can kind of think that way in terms of principles, we're able to visit our goal areas in our comprehensive plan, and then next year this body convenes on updating the transportation system plan. Those kind of principles can be utilized for us to think about what can be done and what's appropriate considering the context of the public right-of-way and conferring of transportation in the facilities. So we're not completely hampered by state law if we can connect the opportunities that we have from ostensibly adopting the comp plan and those aspects of urban design and the sharing of space to what we do in the transportation system plan. I just would like us to keep that top of mind as you will go forward in the future in thinking about issues, because there will be trade-offs, but we can think about the fact that there'll be multiple users and we may be able to accommodate different needs in different contexts. So the state isn't putting too much of a thumb down on us. We have an opportunity to be proactive if we can think more towards a vision.
Yeah, from a housing standpoint, I completely and totally understand, the burden. I mean, really, people don't. Building an ADU is a risk assessment that you need to assess for yourself as a property owner. And there are things that cost a lot of money, and putting in a driveway pad is one of those. I mean, it's one of those things. Or putting in curbs and sidewalks and the whole, well, I guess that's probably still required. But at any rate, but all that stuff is, very expensive, and for the amount of square footage that you get out of your ADU really jacks up the price of that ADU to actually not make it pencil. And so these are two simple things that can, one, not being owner-occupied encourages somebody that owns a home that rents out one side and maybe can be able to subdivide it or give out a basement to provide two houses for people, right? That's totally understandable. The off-street parking thing, I totally get it, because it actually really does cause this huge hamper on being able to build your ADU. And it is the local issue here because of the way we have treated our streets for so long. And, it's maybe a little bit of ill-preparedness for a housing crunch, or it's just the way that we kind of like it as citizens. And so you're right, it will all work itself out in the long run, but, in the short run, there's some pain that gets...
Which is the on-the-ground reality. There's a transition.
Yeah.
We are about approaching that transition as a body.
Quick question. This is being a Type 5 legislative process. We're not making a final decision. We're presenting a recommendation to City Council. If we vote to not make a recommendation, just hypothetically, does this still advance to City Council? We don't block this from moving forward.
Unless that's construed as a synonym for abdicating our responsibility.
I think council can still have a public hearing on it without planning commission's recommendation. And I have a feeling that, given the timing and the quick process that we have to do to have this enacted and ready to go by its enactment date, or its January 1st, that council would hold a hearing on it in their own regard.
So I just wonder, after hearing 4 sets of reservations from 4 out of the 5 commissioners here, that we have an opportunity to take a principal stand with no real implications, and that's a luxury. So if we felt like taking a principal stand and not referring this recommendation, feel free to do so, Commission. There's no consequences, as far as I can tell, in terms of our compliance with the state law in the end, assuming council moves forward with that. So I think we should make a recommendation based on our judgment of the merits of the proposal and not the compliance with state law, because city council has to make that determination.
True.
Let me add one more thing here. Although I said we don't have a lot of options, let me go back to what I think is the base issue here. And I don't think that state law is really concerned about parking, okay? I think the state law is about increasing housing, okay? Yes. And I am supportive of increasing housing, because I think if you have a greater housing supply, less demand, it's the consequence of that is to make housing more affordable, more options and that kind of thing. So I would be in support of that. And so I understand that there are some side effects of that. But I would be in support of that basic premise of increasing housing supply.
So you're in favor of advancing the recommendation to City Council?
I am.
Both because it's compliant with state law and on the merits of the changes?
Right.
And
I'm with Commissioner Massey on that.
Yeah.
And I'm pointing to the comp plan goals and policies in this case on those terms too.
how do you feel about that, Commissioner Loosefeld?
I'm also in support of additional housing. It's a desperate need, but these are only amendments to that, and it's not in any way is it putting any jeopardy in jeopardizing the ability of ADUs, of folks who want to pursue ADUs. So I still tend to think I want to send a message that and not support this amendment, these 2 amendments.
Ms. Loosevelt, Commissioner Loosevelt, for my own well-being.
Loosevelt, by the way.
Loosevelt, sorry. Will you please explain the stand that we would be taking?
So I hadn't thought about the no recommendation path, which was intriguing. I had thought, frankly, just to outright not, there's not going to be necessarily how would you craft the motion not to, I guess it would have to be not to recommend. I mean, the motion is either we recommend or we don't.
Right, but what is the point that we are trying to send to council?
A message that there's concern of these 2 issues and that the outcome of adopting these amendments. I think you're just sending a message of pause, essentially, to City Council, of which they may also have their hands tied and there may be nothing to do with it, but I think it's a responsibility of the commission to recognize that, to highlight that if we have concern that we should express it, not just simply indicate that our hands are tied. And so.
Okay.
So I wonder if a motion to recommend the changes as presented in the staff report with an addendum that these types of decisions are better made at the local level rather than the state level, and that we object to having our hands forced in this decision, would be one way to recommend that we stay compliant with the House Bill 2001, but object to the not having an opportunity to truly make a decision around how best to manage Milwaukee's
Right.
parking and accessory dwelling unit
I think
policies and
I think
laws.
that seems like a reasonable middle ground.
Would you state that again?
I probably can't. But just that we would vote to recommend the changes as presented in the staff report with an objection to these regulations around accessory dwelling units and parking being made at the state level when the decisions are better made at the local level, something along those lines.
But essentially, that's a yes. Is it?
It's a yes while we're holding our
Yes,
nose.
but.
A yes,
we're
but.
holding
Yes,
our
but.
nose, yeah.
Okay.
And would it get recorded that way?
Yes, a staff report would go to the city council that reflects the vote with whatever annotation that you put into the motion. So we've done that before, that, planning commission vote to recommend, but had concerns about X, Y, Z. And I mean, that's par for the course. We would reflect that in the staff report to the city council, yes.
I wonder if there's any way to be more specific about our concern or what, if we have to accept that this is happening, what could, in that but, might we say that further points toward these opportunities, as you say, Adam, or, excuse me, Commissioner Argo, that could really point city council in that direction more specifically? Is there?
Well, it's hard to point to the comp plan in that regard because this is where the code comes in after you do the goal setting, right? So we've got these affordable housing goals. They do, to me, as Commissioner Massey said, they somewhat align with what we have work to do in the update to the comp plan on understanding the housing emergency, trying to enact goals and objectives at relief for homeowners and renters within the aegis of that emergency. But unfortunately, the thing is, first you have to adopt the code, then you have to adopt the comp plan, then you get into the code implementation. So I'm not sure how well we're positioned on moving ahead on implementation steps, even though de facto this is somewhat implementation.
Yeah.
So I would say one thing you want to voice is your intent in implementation to visit some things that are going to get at the provision we have trouble with, including the vacation rental aspect, the regulating how much of it is the owner occupied requirement, and then parking issues. So that's why I tend to think at this stage my inclination is to move forward with the amendments, but I want to make sure that our motion gives you the space to be able to say, well, in implementation, we have concerns that we want to address at that time. I wish I don't have a magic recipe other than knowing the process is where it kind of puts us.
I would go with what Vice Chair Burns has said, is that we'll go ahead and make this recommendation, but we feel that that the state, by achieving these new housing goals, has not given enough local control to be able to address their own concerns with these, right? Is that kind of?
Yes.
Seems fair to me to say.
Do you want to say that one more time with a few more words in front of it so we can move?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend to City Council approval of application ZA 2019-002 and adoption of the recommended findings of approval found in attachment 2, with a side note that even though the state is looking to achieve its housing goals, it has not allowed the local authorities to be able to address the issues that these goals create.
Specifically, yeah. I would just add, if possible, specifically related to vacation home requirements, on-street parking, and pedestrian or
Something beyond these two.
probably, period.
I'll include that in my motion.
I think we need to say owner occupancy of ADUs rather than the vacation rentals, just to get at the distinction that
Okay.
that Vera mentioned. So
Okay, I'll approve that in my motion as well.
Don't ask us to repeat that. Good.
could you repeat it, Vera?
Really? Okay.
If you have
No.
it written down in a concise
Motion to
way.
recommend approval to the city council. However, the planning commission objects to not having the opportunity for municipalities to regulate parking and owner occupancy of accessory dwelling units because some decisions are better made at the local level than at the state level.
That works for me.
Is that all right?
That's why we pay her.
Okay.
Yep.
That is Commissioner
Exactly
Hemer's
right.
motion.
That is my motion.
That was very eloquent.
We're looking for a second.
Oh, I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
All right.
This decision is a recommendation to the City Council, which will make the final decision after a public hearing. Please see planning staff for details concerning the City Council hearing date and process. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for attending today. You're welcome to stick around for the work session if you like.
Thanks. Good stuff.
Can I ask a clarifying question of the attorney before he takes off? Does that actually get written into the council ordinance?
Yeah.
What's that?
Oh,
Does our objection get written in only if they accept it as well?
Oh, yeah, I would assume that they'll have to incorporate your language. You're just making a recommendation to them.
Right.
They make their final decision. Had you recommended that they not adopt it, they could still adopt it.
Right.
Yeah,
But
so they can certainly choose to incorporate a similar
they
objection.
could write in another whereas and make an objection
They
if they
could, or
wanted to.
they could wholeheartedly disagree with you and make a decision on a completely different grounds.
Okay, thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is the work session items, process and schedule for updating comprehensive plan policies. So thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair Burns. David Levitan, Senior Planner. So I just wanted to briefly go over just a little bit of an overview of the process to update the comprehensive plan policy document, which is currently scheduled to come back before you in January for a public hearing before it's considered by the City Council. And then just discuss a little bit about the next steps in the review and adoption process, and then potential next steps following adoption of the policy document. So just a little bit of the basics. I'm going to be really brief just because we've talked about this a lot. This process has been ongoing for about 2 years. It's really the first phase of updating the comprehensive plan. We wanted to get a really strong foundation in the policies before we moved on to any potential map amendments or any of the code amendment work that will follow, related to a whole slew of different topics: housing, natural resource protection, historic resources, all those types of things. We split up the policy work into 4 blocks of work, each of which was approximately 6 months. At the end of each block of work, we've been pinning down the policies by council resolution, basically the council acknowledging that a lot of work has gone into the development of these policies. They haven't been adopted by ordinance, and there have not been public hearings for any of the pinning down of these policies. That's going to be the process that's upcoming in 2020, but basically acknowledging that a lot of work has gone into their development. And as I said, the policy document is scheduled for adoption in March of 2020. Just a little bit on the engagement that's gone on for the comprehensive plan policies. We have a comprehensive plan advisory committee, or the CPAC, who have met 24 times over the last 2 years, so basically a meeting per month. The most recent, which was last week, and the last of which is tentatively scheduled for December 16th. We need to finalize that, but we'll send out notice of that. We've had 3 town halls and 2 open houses. We've had a accompanying online open house or online survey that's gone along with those events. Had focus groups, put out notices in the pilot, on the website, social media, via our about 550 to 600 person email list. We've gone out to the NDAs, Neighborhood District Associations, for a variety of things, including discussion of neighborhood hubs. We went out in the month of October to each NDA to discuss basically what we're going over tonight, just the process for adopting the comprehensive plan policies. And then we've been back before you a number of times for each block of work. We've checked in with the Planning Commission, held typically 1 or 2 work sessions for each block of work, and then we've also been to the City Council on 19 occasions. So we've been out there. Just a little bit on the organization. We're going to be bringing a draft of the document on December 10th. We're still working on that right now. I'm going to get into that a little bit more, but we wanted to make sure that you saw the document before it came before you for the public hearing in January. So we've basically taken the categories from the vision, which were we essentially created 5 super actions, which are there on the left under vision super actions, and kind of converted those into comprehensive plan chapters with a couple of sections, between 2 and 4 sections under each category. You'll only see 4 there because the 5th is transportation, basically creating a complete and accessible transportation network. We're going to be doing some additional work on the transportation system plan starting in 2020. So we're going to be carrying over the existing TSP goals, which are then incorporated into the comprehensive plan. The work on the TSP has been done a lot more recently than the rest of the comp plan. There was a major update in 2007, another update in 2013, and so we didn't feel the need to focus on that at this point. We wanted to align that with some of our additional infrastructure analysis that's going on in 2020. The Public Works Department is doing a wastewater and a water master plan, kind of associated with potential residential growth. We're doing some scenario analysis that I think will be able to be incorporated into an update to the TSP. So we wanted to do some of that work and kind of tie in transportation with land use before we actually updated the policies. So what we're doing now, and really kind of over the course of the next month and then 2 months leading up to the public hearings, reviewing the goals and policies for structure, consistency, clarity, redundancy. When you develop policies over the course of 2 years, sometimes there are some slight variations and differences, so we wanted to have as much standardization as possible. We're crafting the introductory narrative, identifying graphics, maps, and photos, and starting to lay those out within our graphic design software. and then creating a glossary and call-out boxes of kind of important terms that we want to make sure, as planners, sometimes we speak in a different language than others, and we want to make sure that this is a really easily digestible document. So again, the upcoming project schedule is we currently have work sessions scheduled with the Planning Commission on December 10th and the City Council on December 17th to kind of review the layout and design. We're required by law to issue a 35-day notice to the Department of Land Conservation and Development and to Metro. We've already provided drafts of the policies to each of those governing bodies. Metro has completed their review and hasn't identified any issues as far as potential conflicts with the Metro functional plan or other things within their purview. We're currently waiting for DLCD's review of the policies, but we have been in close contact with them. We'll be having our public hearing with you either on January 14th or January 28th. We're trying to align that with some other items on the agenda, but we'll make sure to include that on the forecaster. This being a Type 5 legislative amendment, you would be making a recommendation to the City Council similar to the recommendation, the process that you went through tonight for the ADU code amendments. And then in March of 2020, scheduled to have public hearings with the City Council.
Dave, but can you flip back to that? I don't mean to interrupt you, but when you say layout and design, does that mean that we're not going to actually talk about the words that are in there, just the way that it looks?
You can comment on the words. I mean, we've been commenting on the words over the past 2 years, but there's going to be opportunities for you and for others to comment on the actual language up to and including the public hearings.
Right.
So the focus of the work session on December 10th was just because you hadn't seen them, but we can elongate that meeting if you'd also, in addition to the design, if there is policy language that you would like to revisit.
Just in case if there's a conflict, I mean, there's one statement in goal 1 and there's another statement in goal 5, and they totally contradict each other. We haven't had that opportunity to be able to look at the packages as a whole to look at that yet.
Yeah, so we could add that on the 10th.
So then on the 17th, when council is going to look at that, and although we are very studious and look at it, we also know that council is really going to enjoy discussing this as well. And that's when we're supposed to meet with council that night. Are we sure that they're going to be able to get through it in 4 hours?
So their discussion is during the work session, I believe, on the 17th.
And not during the...
Not during the regular session, which is when your joint session with them would be.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we can, we're going before the council to discuss kind of preliminary discussion of the work plan next week again, specifically related to middle housing work that, previous feedback from the commission. I think at our last discussion of the work plan, there was a lot of questions as far as we previously had housing being a little bit later, and there were several commissioners that asked why, just given how much focus there's been on housing, why that wasn't earlier in 2020. The council basically had similar comments, so we're wanting to start that housing discussion early in 2020. So they're going to be having that discussion next week, and we can, ask for their input on do they need additional time to, really be reviewing the policies. The plan for the joint meeting was to focus on the work plan as opposed to having a joint discussion on the policies.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question, though. So opportunities for public comments. Again, we haven't had public hearings yet, and so we're going to welcome comments. We've circulated just the policies, just the actual policies as opposed to the entire document is available on our website now. We've sent that out via email. It's on the city website, trying to circulate that in as many ways as possible, coming to work sessions to identify that. Basically, people can start commenting on the policies now and comment on them all the way through the Planning Commission public hearing, all the way through the City Council public hearing. So there is a lot of opportunities for public comments, both written testimony and then can come to the public hearings to provide oral testimony. And so Again, a draft of the complete document, we are required to provide that to DLCD and to Metro at least 35 days before the first Planning Commission public hearing, so that will be available for public review as well. And then I wanted to just talk a little bit about potential next steps, and specifically, we're not going to get into the entire work plan because that's going to be something that's discussed jointly with the City Council on December 17th, but specifically related to housing and House Bill 2001 compliance and middle housing and helping to implement the community vision and some of the policy language that's in the draft housing policies. You know, we've spent a whole lot of time over the last 2 years talking about middle housing options and expanding housing opportunities in Milwaukee and the best way to do that. And so as you discussed earlier tonight, there are some constraints within, you know, House Bill 2001 and it being essentially a state mandate. They're currently going through their rulemaking process to basically establish kind of the flexibility and the that local jurisdictions have. Basically, they want to establish basic ground rules so that cities do have local control, but within certain parameters. And so kind of looking at it, this isn't just a topic that came out of House Bill 2001. It's included in the community vision, calls for middle housing options in all neighborhoods. The draft comprehensive plan policies talk about expanding middle housing opportunities throughout the city. So this is something that predated a lot of the House Bill 2001 work, and we felt was a natural place to start on some of the potential code work. So just a little bit on an overview. We touched on the ADU component of House Bill 2001, which is not really what it's known for. The major part of House Bill 2001 is that for cities greater than 25,000 or those within the metropolitan region of Portland, they must allow a duplex on any lot where a single family residence is permitted. So a 5,000 square foot lot in the R5 zone is allowed to have one single family residence. House Bill 2001 says that now on that same lot you're required to allow for a duplex. It does give local jurisdictions the opportunity to establish local siting standards, such as setbacks and building envelope. We have our side yard height plan and other local standards, so there is some local control involved there. And then beyond that, duplex, cities are required to allow triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, and then I didn't add townhouses in there, but they're also required within any zone where single-family residential is permitted. And so there are different ways to do that. You can have a more focused approach. You can have a citywide approach that is kind of context-based. As I said, DLCD is just starting their rulemaking and model code process, which is expected to be completed in June 2020. And then zoning codes are required to be updated by June of 2022. And so last week, we kind of introduced this topic with the City Council. Basically, we had two questions for them. Is the council comfortable with keeping existing land use designations in zoning districts and moving straight to the code work? So not really worried about amending the comprehensive plan land use map or the zoning map, basically kind of zeroing in on within our existing zoning designations, where should these housing types be allowed? And then the second question being, should opportunities for triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters, should they be permitted citywide and context-based? So context-based would be establishing minimum lot sizes that might be larger for a triplex or a fourplex than a single-family home, establishing greater open space requirements or greater setbacks, or should we have a more focused approach? So along corridors or within certain proximity of schools or commercial areas. The state is going through their rulemaking process, but they, wanted to make sure, and I think part of the way that they got, certain jurisdictions on board with the legislation was ensuring them that there would be an opportunity for cities to go through this process to establish what they feel is appropriate for their community. So looking at next steps, we're going to be going back to the city council next week to get any additional thoughts and direction from them kind of in advance, so we can be thinking about this before the December 17th joint session with the Planning Commission. So we're going to be attending an overview of House Bill 2001 down at Clackamas County that DLCD staff is holding specifically for jurisdictions within Clackamas County. So that's on December 3rd. And then we, kind of based on the direction that we get from the Planning Commission and the City Council, our plan is to start thinking about issuing an RFP so that we can start really thinking about the community engagement that we need to do, especially regarding this issue. It's going to be different than the engagement that we did for policies, because code work is different than policy development. So we want to make sure that we get that right for the Milwaukee community. And then we'll kind of take it from there. So last slide, just kind of leading into next week's meeting with the City Council, and then looking forward to our joint session on December 17th. We just wanted to see if you had any questions about the policy review opportunities or the adoption schedule for the policy document. And then the second question is, do you have any recommendations to council regarding the process to update our code regarding middle housing? So they're going to be discussing this. We'd be happy to bring forward any kind of recommendations from the Planning Commission that, you know, you want to make sure that they consider when they're thinking about the scope and the outreach associated with this effort. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
I've got one. So David, or in your thoughts, would it be in Milwaukee's best interest to wait until the model code is developed before we really started putting ink to paper on our own code?
I think we're going to have that discussion with council. I think we're not especially concerned. I think that the model code from the state is going to be for jurisdictions that are looking to do as little as possible and basically essentially create exclusionary zoning, that they limit these middle housing types so much that they eventually make it so it's impossible to do.
Interesting.
I mean, that's kind of the general discussion and the discourse that we heard, you know, as HB 2001 was being considered. I think there's already been some pushback from several jurisdictions within the metro region, and which is understandable. I mean, people feel differently about the level of local control that there should be regarding land use planning. But, you know, part of the reason that we're going to be meeting with DLCD, and we've reached out to them and asked them if they'd be willing to come and speak to the council to provide early guidance. We want to kind of build on the momentum related to the comprehensive plan and keep it going, but not operate outside the kind of, you know, anticipated parameters of the rulemaking process. So kind of long answer short, we're not overly concerned. At least we haven't heard from the council that they want to be so limiting in where these types of uses are permitted. We obviously need to get input from the community, and we want to have that community engagement process and that public outreach process to get feedback from people. And so if we do hear that from the community, we may need to change course and expand either the schedule or the outreach opportunities.
Thank you. I appreciate your insight on that. Thanks.
I do have one comment, and this is, you've heard it before. My concern is that how we treat greenways in all of this. And because most of them could be considered either major arterial streets or corridors. And we have one that hasn't necessarily been adopted in the TSP yet. We have one that shouldn't really exist because it's unbuildable. And we have one that is quasi, been talked about or been discussed, but yet plans are moving forward. I'll use the specific plans are being moved forward to develop Monroe Greenway. But if that's considered a major corridor, what happens until, we throw it up on the TSP and we allow fourplexes, and all of a sudden we add all this density onto a greenway, right? Is that really what we want as a city? And that's my question. And the one like Stanley that will probably never, ever get built out, are you going to limit fourplexes and stuff like that because of all the road work that they have to do to make this greenway happen, when it can be perfectly done? I mean, you have the beginning section of Stanley at Railroad that is, almost ideal for this kind of work. And so are you going to limit them because it is labeled a greenway? And then the whole 29th, is 29th been discussed as a greenway or hasn't it been discussed as a greenway? And I would like, I know that we're putting the TSP off, but I think that this is one of these, you got major sections of town that you have these opportunities to put these things into, but do we want to treat them the way that they are written currently? And that's one of my big concerns is that we write in all these rules and then we never take Stanley off, and so nobody's ever going to build a fourplex or a townhome there because of all the road improvement that they have to do because it's labeled as a greenway.
Yeah, so, I mean, I would say that, the process that we develop, I think, has the opportunity to incorporate those concerns and those variables that exist throughout the community. It's going to be a citywide analysis of where
I understand that, but what I'm worried about is that if we do the middle housing first, right, and everybody says, and there's a public outcry that says, well, we shouldn't allow a bunch of density on greenways, then it's like, well, okay, well, we've never adopted the Monroe Greenway, right? And if we want the density, then we just don't ever adopt the greenway when we're planning on doing work on it. Or the same thing with Stanley, where they say, hey, you know what? We realize that Stanley's probably never, ever going to become a greenway. And if we say, well, we'll allow it all on greenways, then all of a sudden Monroe Greenway gets there and we have a bunch of vehicle traffic on these greenway streets. Right?
Are you saying greenways are going to activate vehicular traffic?
If you add a bunch of density, yeah.
Well, isn't that where our choices are about how we think about the public street realm? I mean, you can also...
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying that, we should do the things that we have already kind of set in stone, like the Monroe Greenway is not in the TSP.
It's been adopted, Greg.
It has been adopted, I believe, right?
It hasn't been adopted officially into the TSP?
No, by council, by resolution.
I understand that, but it's not in the TSP.
They can adopt by resolution so that it technically is in the TSP, but I know what you mean.
Right, and Stanley, which is a greenway, which we haven't done a single bit of work on it since 15 years ago or 20 years ago when we adopted it, because it's too expensive to actually do. That might limit how we're going to put these things in corridors and so on and so forth. And that's just that. I think that we should. In my personal view is that what I'm worried about is that we're going to get things like, oh, okay, well, we can do density here, here, and here, right, on corridors, right? But Stanley is a perfect corridor to be able to add density, whether or not it's greenway or not, but then we introduce this barrier of what you have to do to be able to build that density in, which almost makes it then unbuildable because of the added expense.
I think you're getting at standards. Is that right?
No, because they exist. You have to do whatever the Greenway tells you that you have to do by the Greenway standards that are already built in.
As far as on the private property or as far as within the right-of-way?
Within the right-of-way, which are much higher and much more expensive standards than they are anywhere else in town that isn't a Greenway.
Well, this is...
and this is where, right, we're going to be talking about the middle housing, the choices where we want to put things, right? And our maps that tell us where we can put things, right, are not necessarily accurate nor what is desired. And all I'm asking is that, maybe we just take a step back and we do the quick look at the TSP and we focus on the greenways and we bring in the Monroe Greenway into the TSP, and we take a look if 29th is worth adding into the TSP or not, and then we take a look at Stanley and see if it's worth taking it out. And then that way, we can treat these roads as different than we can Railroad Avenue. Because no matter what, you're going to look at Monroe and Railroad, and you're going to treat them exactly the same. And is that what you want in a Greenway section?
Well, I think that's what the discussion is going to be. So I think there would be the opportunity to do that. I mean, especially if we went to more of a location-based approach, where if you need to, concerned about considering proximity to a greenway and the, how that impacts the ability to have these middle housing types and what the impacts vice versa of density is on a greenway that is intended, for increased pedestrian and bicycle use. So that's something I think that could be incorporated into the process. So if you have specific, things that you would like to see, I would encourage you to raise them. And I mean, we're taking those notes now, and I think we can pass those on, that we need to make sure that we're thinking about not just the existing street classifications and land use designations, if there are specific areas where it either hasn't been incorporated into the TSP or where you see as opportunities for this type of growth.
I guess my worry is that, you go through all this middle housing stuff and you open up the door, right? You change those codes. And it takes you 5 years to get to the TSP, right? By that time, that development may have already happened before you've even adopted into these things that you want the changes on. That is my worry. And that's why I think, a quick look at the TSP and a quick discussion first is actually the best way. I know we all want to get into the housing thing, but you have until 2022 to worry about your state bill. But I really think that we should take a real quick look at the TSP and say, look, what is missing and what isn't before we start designing where houses are going to go without the road system implemented.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
No, and I appreciate the
feedback. You got to put it on a grid, and if our grid is bad on a piece of paper, then, it just doesn't make sense to me.
So the schedule that's laid out here has the TSP updates starting in mid-2020, and what you're suggesting is to have a high-priority early actions on the TSP begin just immediately in 2020.
Yeah, I understand that the focus is trying to get all this middle housing in because you want all this development, but it doesn't do you any good if your grid map that you're going to be working off of is incorrect, or it's not what you desire.
I think you're making very good points, and I think I could sympathize and agree with them, but I'm trying to turn it into a succinct recommendation.
My succinct recommendation would take a real quick look at the TSP first, number one, and say, you know what, we should probably do this, and this first.
High-priority early action adjustments to the TSP ahead of the comprehensive review of the TSP.
And just a quick look. I mean, you don't have to go through and do everything.
How does the rest of the commission feel about that as a recommendation?
I think that you may miss an opportunity to autopsy your process that you did before. Because the thing is, Greg, you're normatively, and this makes a lot of sense, you're logically following what you would see is going to happen based on what you've experienced with the process so far and with Greenways and with Monroe. But the TSP doesn't have a Greenway network. It does not have a context-based approach yet that I could see aligning to the comprehensive plan that we're updating now. It's not there yet. It could be. You can take some say prescriptive actions, but I'm talking about, for instance, when you're saying, well, the middle housing is going to mean that we're going to build to some already conferred design elements that are adopted in the plan or by standards. And I'm not seeing that the TSP is where that is, where what we're doing, right?
Right, but so what my concern is that when we talk about middle housing and where we're going to stick duplexes, fourplexes, triplexes, whatever the secondary thing is, right? We can say, oh, well, we'll put them on corridors, or we won't put them on greenways, or they can only be on major arterials and not on secondaries, right? And that's what the discussion is going to come, or we just say, we just allow them outright, or they can only be on corners. However that all works. So my question is that, if we're going to be looking at corridors and roadways and everything else, and our map is not what we want, then why wouldn't you start with the map with what you want?
Could it be as simple as having the missing middle housing analysis include designated greenways as by council resolution in addition to the TSP without requiring amending those greenways into the TSP?
Well, Monroe's already been adopted by resolution, but it actually hasn't, it's not on the map. Okay? So but then we can say, oh, well, why don't we just go ahead, we'll just go ahead and color it green, right? Right? And we'll just call it a greenway. But it still doesn't eliminate the fact, well, is 29th a greenway or not? Is it ever going to be a greenway or not? There's still that kind of question floating around. No, hold on. And then the other question is that the other greenway we have is Stanley. So if we applied the same rules that we do to Monroe, we got to apply to Stanley. But you know what? Everybody will admit that Stanley should not be a greenway.
Would it be possible to prepare some analysis of how greenways would fit into the schedule that's laid out here? Because I think Greg I'm hearing some what ifs and some fears that maybe could be addressed by incorporating that into the analysis.
Well, I would just
could be consistent with the schedule that's proposed.
I think we can incorporate that in. I would point out that I think the direction that we get from council as far as, there's more than just the transportation aspect of this. We need to get some direction from council and from the community from an equity perspective as far as where they want to see this. A lot of the House Bill 2001 work and a lot of, our housing forum back in December of 2018, that kind of focused and had the presentation from the author of The Color of Law. A lot of this comes from kind of an equity point of view as far as, you had all these uses that historically were permitted pretty much everywhere. And then they, just over the course of the last 5, 6, 7, 8 decades, basically became exclusionary single-family zoning. And so there is that component of it that we need to get that direction from council. If they have clear direction that they want to take a citywide approach, then we need to fit our greenway analysis and other transportation analysis within that citywide approach and develop appropriate standards citywide. So it's kind of like the chicken and the egg. Do we do all of the transportation analysis and let that dictate our approach, or do we establish try to establish a desired approach for how we permit these things and then develop appropriate standards throughout the city that take into consideration proximity to greenways and things like that. You might still allow them, but the improvements might be different. The TSP largely feeds in to capital improvements that get funded and what priorities are. That's essentially the main role of the TSP.
It's also a section of the comprehensive plan.
It is. It gets incorporated.
And that's
into
the thing you are getting at, where I'm trying to get at is done the kind of definitional context setting that I think City Council is wanting to go after. The comprehensive plan has very different new aspects of urban design, right, in our urban design goal. And part of that is starting with a consideration of what you can do within a right-of-way that, to me, is an evolving aspect different from what we've done in our previous TSP work, which is what most jurisdictions in the state did. They did classifications. They did a needs analysis based on measures towards throughput of vehicles. I'm not saying this is bad. I'm saying this is what was done before. But where we're at now is that the lens you're talking about to be applied would mean that we have to do some different context setting of what the network would be like and what you need to do with it. And I'm just worried that what Greg's talking about is we can't go there if we don't have those things in place on what a different needs analysis would look like.
I get it. Thank you. I understand what you're saying now. And I understand better now your point aside, right? I'm looking at the way that it used to be and that we're going to apply the rules the way that it used to be, but you're telling me that our TSP is going to look something totally different because it's going to be it is now driven by a different concept than what it was 20 years ago.
Yes, I will fully confess that because I have to know these things, that there are ways that the rulemaking and the way that the state on down to local municipalities have interpreted the transportation planning rule. That's an element of our land use planning goals in the state, and that definitely a multimodal context is changing and evolving where TSPs are going. Even though, it's like you said, it's a relatively recent TSP, but what I'm saying is the Greenway, first, are we understanding the contextual definition of what we're saying about the public realm and the space that makes something a greenway? Aren't we really trying to align it with our comprehensive planning goals and the visioning work that we've done? And I guess what I am advocating for, and I am saying that, measures on throughput, I'd love to see that we're evolving past that, because I'm interested in us thinking about who are the users of the space. What if we put human beings on the top? Well, then your needs analysis is going to look a lot different. Your aspect of what you consider of the public realm and the context is going to look a lot different. So I'm just trying to make sure that you have some first principles before you would want to go at a needs analysis and lose that opportunity to maybe think more of that, applying an equity lens, applying those other goal areas that we worked through, and that I know that we haven't adopted the comp plan yet, but I feel like we need to have the discussion of the nexus there, and then realize that does mean an evolution of our process in the TSP update.
Yeah, and so what I was proposing is that, hey, you just pick up the TSP and you take a look at, those three greenways. Mm-hmm. And I guess there might be a lot more work behind it than what I think that if by rule you have to do a needs analysis and you have to do a traffic count to be able to take these things in and out or whatever you have to do, that's going to delay then the process way too long. If it's something that we can simply pick up the document and have a hearing on saying, do we want to keep Stanley as a greenway? Do we want to make Monroe officially a greenway? And what do we want to do with 29th? And just leave it at that. And it will be a 2-month process, then go for it. If it's going to be a 2-year process because we need all of this data to be able to come up with the solution, then I would put the housing first, right? Do you understand what I mean?
I do, yeah. And I mean, I think, yeah, we can bring this up next week with council. I mean, I think when it comes down to it, I think having a general concept, some general direction with input from the Planning Commission, but ultimately from the council that would be vetted through the community as far as the scope of, expanding opportunities for middle housing, I think will feed directly into a TSP update, because you need to have basically an identified scope and the parameters of what that growth is going, potentially could be. And then you need to have the infrastructure in place to support it. And so you look at, should these be allowed on greenways, or should this be a greenway? Or, should our 7 or our 10 be located along arterials? Do those things need to start getting changed? I think you start opening up a lot more of the transportation analysis that we thought dovetailed more with some of the potential map work in the future, which, these things are all kind of tied together. And so, yeah, we need to develop, one of Denny's famed flowcharts or something like that, just how all these things are interrelated. And I think before we take any steps no matter which that, whatever the first step is.
What I appreciate, though, about what Commissioner Emer's talking about, too, is we should have tools, right, already. There should be a way to utilize what's in the toolbox to get at some of these kind of pre-TSP understandings and issues. And also, I think you're seeing the comp plan and its implications. So there's a lot of value to that, and I hope that gets understood, or that gets its due discussion by the city council, because that's a good thing. What I'm hoping is we all recognize what the opportunity of a TSP update represents, and that is we can actually start rethinking how we've considered users of the system and what we measure and prioritize towards the way we make decisions on recommendations, be it classifications or spot treatments, Anyway,
Great.
Thanks.
Very good, Greg, thank you. Sorry, we made the meeting last a half hour more.
Yeah, but that's good stuff.
I think that was the point of the work session. I think this was very
Yeah.
on point to what we were here to do.
Very on point.
So David had presented a couple of questions around the process over the next 3 to 4 months leading up to the planned adoption of the goals and policies in March 2020, and then additional opportunities that we should consider for public review and comment. I think we had a very deep discussion around how the transportation system plan and the greenways fit into the 3 to 4 month schedule. Are there other elements of this outside of that topic that the commissioners wanted to provide feedback or have discussion on?
No, I'm thinking, we're at a culminating point, right? We've had a lot of good work session on those goal areas and the language therein. I haven't really thought to reopen the box of what we've vetted pretty carefully already, but I know that we don't have the door closed yet.
Yeah, I've mentioned this in a previous meeting, and I just want to reiterate it again. There's a lot of work ahead of us over the next year. And, I just caution us that we can't come into this meeting every Tuesday night and expect to knock out all this work. And so, therefore, I'm still a proponent of one or two people getting together and tackling a problem, not to cut out the other commissioners, but to take the lead on it so that a lot of the grunt work, the leg work, whatever you want to call it, can be done between the meetings, because there's just not enough time in Tuesday nights to get all this done.
Form a subcommittee.
Yep. Whatever you want to call it.
Committee work.
Well, and that's one of the questions, that we'll be asking is does the council want to be forming committees or subcommittees? It's going to be influenced by the process and the scope of individual components, whether it be middle housing, whether it's the tree code, whether it's all sorts of different things. The scope of the work is obviously going to influence the public engagement, and then, some of the committee work and just the capacity of the Planning Commission and the City Council. I wholeheartedly acknowledge some of the concerns. I look at that work plan and, sometimes it keeps me up at night. So, those are all discussions that we're going to continue to have, and I think that's going to be a major focus of that December 17th joint meeting, as far as how do we make sure that we move, along with this work plan over the next 2 years and actually get things accomplished, as opposed to just have them, us trying to show up every couple of weeks and just kind of running in place. So,
Are we satisfied with the opportunities for public review and comment that are outlined here, which would be a series of opportunities to testify at public meetings in December, January, and March to both the Planning Commission and City Council? Is there anything more that we would recommend?
I think it's going to be dictated by the amount of public comment that is given. And, if we have a room full at our first meeting, it will be a half a room at the next meeting, and it will be a quarter of the room because everybody's got to get through it. And given the fact that our normal workload doesn't go away either, it may extend itself out for 4 or 5 months.
Well, I'm wondering about opportunities outside of commission or council hearings that we would recommend more.
I think I think what happens is that you can get to a process where, you can reach out to the public. How many people attended the last open house on October 23rd?
About 70 people.
Right, so you get to a point where you're just discussing without any sort of decision-making happening, and it wears on people. You kind of got to get to the point where the decision-making stuff is happening.
And that's where we're at through the.
Right, I mean, we're
laid out.
Well, and the point of the last open house wasn't to review the policies, was that just to inform people about opportunities and where we were in the process. And
Right.
all the opportunities that they would have to comment, to show that a lot of this is, a lot of work has gone into the development of the policies, but nothing has been finalized yet until the council,
right.
adopts it by ordinance, so.
I guess I'd just ask then, David, if you got what you needed out of this work session, and if the commissioners feel like they've had adequate opportunity to discuss and provide feedback.
Yeah, I think so. We're going to obviously continue to have these conversations, and so I appreciate the early feedback.
Thank you.
May I say something before we, when the layout and design is being sent out, could you actually mail me a paper copy? I know. But it'll be much easier to be able to compare the pages. I'm assuming that you'll probably be dropping off in my house because you can't afford the $50 to mail it out. But yeah, it'll be much easier to peruse, and it's going to be too many pages for me to print out.
Okay, we'll just put it on the 34, and then you can just run out and
All right,
run
perfect.
out and meet it.
Perfect. Yeah, just take it down to the new public library that's opening it up and take up that copier for about 5 or 6 hours. They'll
There
be
you
happy
go.
to do that for you.
All right, well, thank you.
So, well, then, next on the agenda is the other business and updates, planning department, other business updates.
Yeah, well, I think we went over the upcoming schedule, some of the public events. I would just like to extend the department's gratitude and appreciation for Commissioner Argo, this being his last meeting. It's been great to personally get to know you over the last few years, and I know this is a lot of work, and you have a long commute and a family, and so we appreciate all the hard work and effort that you've put in over the last several years.
Well,
It's leaving a big void.
I just want to express extreme gratitude and appreciation to my past and present commissioners and to City of Milwaukee staff. There has never been a time where you haven't exercised to the utmost through, the highest ethical standards, professional standards, an ability to have a collegial atmosphere with careful deliberation, consideration of what our residents and the communities have to say, no matter where they sit on an issue. And also that the staff has just gone 100%. I don't like to say over 100% because mathematically that doesn't exist. But there's never been a time where you haven't done your best to make sure we are best informed to make the best decisions that we can as a body. So thanks a lot. It's been a good 4 years. I intend to be a bit of probably a pain in the rear through the TSP updates, but part of why I'm stepping down, just for disclosure, is that at ODOT, I am going to be leading the update to the Oregon Transportation Plan, which is the state's guiding statewide plan that sort of, I won't say it supersedes the TSPs, but it's enough of a kind of a hierarchical structure where I felt like it's not really appropriate for me to be convening decision-making in this realm where we're working with our community and also local agencies, where I'm also working on that realm. And I think for the sake of transparency and the sake of just maintaining a kind of a clear conscience ethically, I want to navigate and focus on what I'm doing with the state. But thanks a lot to everybody for being my friend and my colleagues. I appreciate it. Thanks. We have exciting times ahead, don't we? Never stops.
Good night, thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you being there.
Any other planning commission updates or discussion items tonight?
I'd like to remind everybody that South Downtown is opening up November 21st. They're going to have a big party from 5:30 to 7:30. Might want to bring your flashlight. And once again, the annual Christmas at the museum. Come in free admission, get some treats, see the museum dressed up in holiday flair, and Santa will be there, free photos with Santa. And I believe Santa has a gift for every little boy and girl. You're never too young or too old to get your photo taken with Santa. That is on December 14th from 11 to 3 p.m.
Great. It is the one true Santa Claus.
It is the one true. Mr. Vice President, Vice Chair
Got a
Burns.
promotion.
Vice Chair Burns has sat on Santa's lap and got his picture taken.
And this one's a little bit further out, but January 11th at 10 a.m. is the grand opening of the new Leding Library.
Yay. Can't wait.
Great.
I actually got to walk inside of it today. It is
Really?
beautiful. It is
Get to
beautiful.
see the mural? Multiple murals?
I'm not allowed to disclose what I saw on the walls.
It was a For Your Eyes Only event. Oh, cool.
Cool.
Great.
I think we've talked a little bit about the forecast for future meetings. No next meeting, nothing scheduled, no meeting planned.
Yeah, I was going to have to threaten you if you weren't able to come to a recommendation tonight on the ADU work, we'd have to convene you on the 26th. So. didn't
Well,
have
that's
to do
fine. You and Denny will both be gone on vacation somewhere, so.
Well, I'll be gone. I don't know where he tends to be here for holidays. So,
Time to get work done.
So there's no meeting on the 4th? Is that what I'm?
no meeting on the 26th.
Okay. 4th Tuesday, should I say?
Correct.
I'll entertain a motion.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.